Hello, everyone. So my name is Nick LaRue. I'm from FilmSnobbery, and if you're not familiar, we cover exclusively independent films, and we talk to folks like yourselves. And it's always exciting to talk to anyone that's going to be having a premiere at Slamdance because it's such a fantastic festival. And I would love to know, who are you folks? We'll start with, is it Stefan?
Yeah, Stefan, you got it perfect.
Fantastic.
Um, yeah, I mean, I'm Stephan Peterson. I'm from Montreal, Quebec, Canada. Been working in kind of unscripted television for over 10 years now as a director and writer. But this is my first feature, and very exciting. It's been many years in the making and kind of a dream come true, and never expected it to kind of get to where it is today. So just ready to soak it all up and enjoy.
You're gonna love it. And our
Oh,
other guest.
I am Sonya Ballantyne. I am originally from the Mississippi Nation in northern Manitoba, Canada. I am primarily a television writer. I also work as a sensitivity consultant in AAA video games. But I am the co-director of the Death Tour. This is also my feature documentary debut, and I am really fascinated that like our big artistic piece is something that combines my two favorite things, wrestling and Native people. So I'm very excited about that and excited to see where the film goes after this too.
Yeah, me too. I find that wrestling was really a big part of my life when I was a kid, when it was the old school WWF and WCW kind of stuff. And, I did all the Wrestling Illustrated and all the different magazines and stuff that they had for it. Once it became WWE, I kind of like mentally checked out. I was like, that's not real anymore. Actually, I think it was when Hulk Hogan turned heel. I think that's when I was out. NWO era, that whole thing, like I was done. Now, but now, wrestling, I feel like it's like comic books a little bit. Like there was a lull, right? And then it kind of came back with a vengeance. And now it's bigger than ever. My wife has actually had interactions with Chris Jericho and Cody Rhodes and all those folks at AEW. She worked at Cracker Barrel, and they did a big Cracker Barrel promotion where they had the barrel in the ring and they were breaking it and all that kind of stuff. And so she got to kind of get a peek behind the curtain on that. And it's weird. My wife, not a wrestling fan, but loved the storytelling aspect. She works in marketing, so it's a lot of storytelling. It's like film. You're trying to sell a story, in this case to sell it to someone, but you're trying to kind of tell a story. And um wrestling is one of those things that it's just an endless amount of stories. How did you folks find this story?
Well, go ahead, Steph.
Um, so like your wife, was not a wrestling fan at all growing up, but I happened to be in a community in kind of northern Manitoba on another project. It was a town that was far flung out in the north, impossible to get to. It took us 3 days of driving over winter roads, sleeping in the back of our trucks, packing our own foods, and we get to the small town with nothing, not nothing, but like a small town with a community center, a grocery store, no hotels, no restaurants, and all of a sudden we're like bunking down for the night in the back of our truck, and we were like four dudes sleeping in the back of a Suburban, and all of a sudden these like kids, like a swarm of kids, 100 kids, all kind of descend upon the community center, and it turns out wrestling was coming to town. So it was the kind of the last thing we were expecting, and so paid $20 to see the show, and couldn't believe my eyes. I saw these full-grown men, and sorry, my dog is crazy here. I don't know if you can hear that. These
Mine was just
full-grown
down here
men.
too.
I wasn't telling if you could hear him, pawing
No.
at the door, but so I thought these full-grown men and women who were like in their speedos doing backflips off the top ropes for these kids who were just losing it, and I knew nothing about wrestling, so for me, just the fact that I saw these like full-grown adults in this kind of like amateur setting in this far-flung place, I was like, why are they doing this? Like, why would they come all the way up here and doing this? And it's kind of goofy, but also really inspiring. And so I spoke to the wrestlers the next morning as they were hitting the road, and like, no, we're doing this for like the next 2 weeks. It's crazy. And I Googled it, and it turned out that I'd kind of stumbled upon this legendary tour that's been going on for decades now. So So that's how I came across it, and that was
And,
about 8 years ago now. Yeah.
and this is year 50 of the Death Tour that you folks filmed for and are releasing on. This is fantastic. You know, to be able to get something on a, you know, kind of an anniversary kind of thing. Sonya, question for you. So has is wrestling big in the indigenous community? Is it something that, you know, is part of their heritage outside of the mainstream at all? You know, what
Um, Well, it's always been a big part of my life personally because my grandparents used to watch Stampede when I was younger. My parents loved the WWF. I still to this day really really love wrestling, though I've kind of fallen out of watching the product just because like there's so much of it to keep up on and like I don't have cable. So but I have seen how we whenever there's a wrestling show, regardless of the promotion, like if it's one of the big two, um 90% of the audience will be indigenous here in Winnipeg. And it's really cool to me just because it's not just adults who were into it in the 80s, it is kids, it is women, it is all types of people of indigenous backgrounds who love it just because I think because storytelling is such a big part of our culture, like not like I am Cree, but in the Ojibwe culture as well, there is like a big focus on storytelling and specifically about heroes and villains or here like heroic stories, people overcoming. And so it's always been something that we connect to just because of the seriousness that it conducts itself with. And so I don't know if it's specifically more popular with Native people, but at least here it is. I think just because of things like the Death Tour, because I encountered it when I was like about 6 years old when it stopped in my home community just to get gas. They weren't performing, but that was the time I got to meet Adam Copeland Edge before he was but this was like about 2 years before he was in the WWF, and so it was really cool because wrestling had this accessibility that I had never had with like sci-fi or fantasy because I got to meet a wrestler for real. Like I saw the Undertaker for real at a Winnipeg arena when I was a kid. Like they are real superheroes, and so I think that is something that really draws indigenous audiences because of the accessibility.
I remember when I was a kid that in the very few times that I remember memories of my dad, he had taken. You could tell I'm a child of the '80s before like people frowned on things. He took me to a bar and we were sitting at the bar and he was chatting with the guy and it turned out to be George the Animal Steel. At least that's what he said it was, who he said it was. And the fact is I was so young that I have no reason to not believe it, but at the same time, it's like that sounds like something that would be fabricated for my dad that he would just run into and be chatting very friendly with George the Animal Steel. But I remember the impact that that had on me, and it immediately looking at the size of the person that I was talking to and looking at the who he was and hearing that, you know, oh, he's the animal, you know, it's, you know, that kind of stuff. And thinking, you know, being a big comic book person myself, like getting into all of that and getting into the storytelling and getting into all that. And I'm from Massachusetts, so we have a large native population here as well. And you know, so that's always in the background. And you're absolutely right. Like in terms of, you know, it storytelling, you know, for that culture also being very important. Um, Unfortunately, a lot of the storytelling ends with people like that look like me not doing good things. What are we gonna do? But um, no, it's interesting. But a lot of the storytelling for that turns out to, and I feel like wrestling. There's there's a lot of family elements to it. And I don't mean family just in the audience, but like especially when you look at movies that have come out in the past 5 or 6 years, you look at the Iron Claw, you look at that the one with oh
Oh, fighting with my family.
Fighting with My Family, yes. Yeah, exactly, stuff like that. Family seems to play a big part in front of and behind the scenes. Is that also true, from both of your perspectives while you were, filming, uh, your film?
I think one of the biggest things that I found when we were filming was how often people found family amongst the wrestlers that they became friends with. We didn't really get to touch on it in the film, but like Sean's grandfather passed away when he was younger, and it really led him down this downward spiral. And it was his trainer who was the one who really assisted him and became kind of a surrogate dad to him. It was the same thing we saw with Sage and Tony in the documentary, because it's like I always felt that there was a lot of trauma involved in why people become wrestlers or why they become great at it in the first place. And I think it's because even with Steph and I, when I remember when we first discussed going into this, I was like, okay, you gotta no matter how silly it gets, you gotta act like wrestling is the most legit, like the most legit thing in the world, because it is, and because they will sniff it out immediately if you think it's funny at all. And so I think that was what got us accepted so quickly by the people we followed, just because we were also in on it, if that makes sense. And yeah, like we now have like such lifelong friends now who we followed on this doc, just because we were there for them when it was the hardest parts of the trip, because we went along on the hardest parts of the trip. And so yeah, I think found family is a big thing in the wrestling community that I really was so inspired to find.
Fantastic. And Stefan, because I want to hear from you now again. Hello. um, how would you how did you both meet? Because you're from I mean, Montreal and Winnipeg are in definitely different areas of Canada. How did you folks meet and get together and decide that this was the project that you wanted to collaborate on?
We didn't know each other prior to this, but I think as soon as the project, we realized that like the project actually had a possibility of happening.
Mhm.
I went up and shot a sizzle for a couple days on like an earlier tour, and like at first I really thought it was just like a film about wrestling. It's kind of it's all I kind of read about. But then after going up on the tour after 2 3 days, we really kind of I kind of came to learn that no, this is there's more to it than just a story about these wrestlers. The communities within which they're wrestling is a big part of the story, and it's not a story that's I know anything about, or it's for me to tell. And so as soon as we realized that like okay, this film actually has like there are people interested, and like we can actually get this thing off the ground, that's when it's like okay, well we got to find a co-director, or it also kind of depended on we had to bring in someone on the team right with me who's from the area. And then so that's when we met. So we heard about Sonya, who was not only from the area but also like a massive wrestling fan. And then we reached out to her. I'll let Sonya continue the story. It's great.
And I said no. So it's like initially when they contacted me, I really wanted to focus on television writing, because I had just gotten full time working as a professional writer, like maybe 6 or 7 months when they first contacted me. And I wasn't interested in doing the documentary initially, just because I had seen various wrestling documentaries specifically around the death tour itself, and I was like, I don't know if I want to do one that's just going to be like a paint by the number standard look at this tour. Like, I really want when it was Steph who actually convinced me to take part in it, because he was so passionate about the parts of the non-wrestling side he wanted to tell, specifically about the communities that the tour goes to, because I was still fascinated, one, that the tour was still going on, and two, that Steph had shown this vulnerability that like maybe he couldn't tell this part of the story, but he knew it needed to be told. And so I was really touched by that. And so I'm really glad I changed my mind, and
Me too.
especially
Yeah.
because everything has been going so great in regards to the film.
So one of the things that I always love about both Canadian and British television and film is how involved the government is in funding and all that kind of stuff. And I noticed that through kind of some of your materials here that Canada as a country seems to be very behind the production of what you folks were doing. And do you think that if you were down here in the United States, it would have been more difficult to get a movie like this made? Or do you feel that, without, because we don't have government funding for stuff like that here, we don't have, a lot of assistance that it's just like, there are, we have on our individual states, we have film commissions, but it's kind of a, let's call it a for-profit operation for a lot of people. Do you find that it would have been more difficult and to get that kind of support if you were making a documentary like this from here in America, or do you find that it really can only be done in a place like, oh, Canada?
I mean, that's a good question. I don't know a ton about the whole producing side of it. I mean, for one, the story would have, not, probably would not be taking place in the States. I mean, it takes, Canada's unique landscape to kind of tell this story. But I mean, I guess time will tell this, the response to it. But there's wrestling fans around the world. I mean, I didn't know about it, and as I kind of discovered wrestling and I started talking about it, all these wrestlers were coming out of like the closet, like, yeah, all these people I knew were like, actually, I'm a huge wrestling fan. I've been watching it my whole life. And so many people I knew in all the different pockets, turns out, yeah, actually, we are huge wrestling fans. So I don't know. I mean, there might be a bigger demand for it than I would, I guess, have expected. And, but I don't know. That's a good question.
Thank you.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, just because it's like I think there would have been pitfalls that might have been things we would have encountered a little bit more closely, because I think if we had made this in the States, it probably would have been produced largely from like uh professional wrestlers that are a little bit more well off. Like that's something like that, and in those cases it might have been like something where they would have to approach producers on our behalf just because it looks better. Like, and so it's, well, not looks better, but like it's like the money situation would be there, whereas in this case it was really cool to be able to get people behind, like organizations like CBC behind the project, because wrestling in Canada, I think, is taken a little bit more seriously than it is in the rest of the world. Like maybe Japan and Mexico are very similar in that context regarding pro wrestling, but I think the film as it is would not have been possible, would not be what it is if it wasn't shot in Canada or done by Canadian producers as well. So I think it was a good bit of lightning in the bottle. Like it was the right mixture at the right time.
Fantastic. No, that's yeah, that's kind of what I kind of expected. That yeah, it's always just nice to have that extra level of support that also lends legitimacy to what you're doing, at the same time. Because it does seem like, well, at least like someone signed off on this, you know what I mean? But yeah, the other part of that too is the death tour lending to itself to legitimacy. Like the death tour is this thing that is, it's talked about as this grueling, arduous kind of thing, and bitter cold, and all of these conditions that you expect to find on like reality TV, right? Like you expect it like to be like a survivor, like ice road truckers like experience, right? Just harrowing. How do you come in as filmmakers to something like this and say, we want to be part of this to tell your story, but we're probably going to be going back to a nice heated hotel at the end of this and still maintain that legitimacy, that camaraderie, and that connection to the material? Like, how did you really have to like embed yourself to the point where it's like, we have to go through what they go through to some degree within reason to make this authentic and to connect properly and to make sure that we're telling the story properly?
Save for like I think twice. We were largely with the wrestlers the whole time in the school gyms, in the backs of like in school classrooms and stuff like that. I think we only had and it wasn't even for the whole time we were there. We had accommodation in God's River for like about 2 of the 4 days we were there, and so that was like just enough to shower and stuff. We were living as hard as they were. I was a bit blindsided though, because I remember when we first stopped in Snow Lake, which is not even a reserve, it's a town. I remember poo-pooing everything and going, "Death tour, this is not that hard." And then we got to Cross Lake, which was the first really tough part of the tour, where the kids almost broke the ring, and we were in like a band hall that had like no heating, and like there was parts where some of the wrestlers were able to almost hit their heads on the roof when they got on certain ropes. And so it was I remember the first question I asked Steph when we first met was like, "Do you know why they called it the Death Tour?" Because I didn't know if he knew how arduous it might be, and so, but I was also kind of sad when because he told me he had gone on the tour, but he hadn't told me that he had only gone on the first three stops, which are not ice road, and I was like, ah. So if I had known that, maybe I would have like backed out again, but no, it was fun ultimately. It was like camping for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the
Yeah.
situation, I mean, I'm older now, I'm in my 40s, but there's a romanticism to even like your initial story, Stefan, of like we were a crew of guys, is basically sleeping in the back of a Suburban, and we happened upon this thing, and I'm like, I love that. I love that so much. Like that story, like for me, I love to travel. I'm a big, like I'm a car guy, not car guy, like, oh, I love cars, but like car guy, like put me in a truck, put me in a car. I love to go on a nice long trip. um, you know, um, and so that feels very romanticized for me. I love that. I know we only have a little bit of time left, so I want to get to something. Another cool part of this, which is you're at the Slamdance Film Festival, baby. You're going to the show. So the great part about slam dance is obviously you have that at the top of the hill, and then at the bottom of the hill you have Sundance going on at the same time. What are your plans while you're in town? I mean, are your plans, aside from your screenings, obviously, how do you plan to take advantage of the opportunity that you kind of have ahead of you? And I want to hear from Stefan first.
I don't know yet. I have to be honest. It hasn't really sunk in. I think I'm kind of, like you like to just get in the car and get somewhere and kind of figure it out once we're boots on the ground. But I plan on doing a couple mixers for sure. Although I did reach out to a local wrestling promotion and they have a match on Saturday night. So I don't know. I might go check out some wrestling, although I should probably go do some networking and stuff like that. But I definitely want to go catch a
That's where
couple
your
films.
audience is going to be. So
Yeah.
you have
Yeah,
to
well,
decide. You have to decide: am I going to go network with other people who, they're also there for their films, or do I want to network with my audience who will actually pay money for this film? You know,
well,
bring
wrestlers
a
are pretty cool.
distributor with
So
you.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, who knows? Maybe we'll bring the whole crowd down. Yeah, I mean, this is first festival. I have no idea what to expect, so I'm just open for anything and ready to go for. But we're well surrounded by a team of veteran producers and
Just
Annie
be
and
aware
everybody.
of
So
the altitude issues. I remember going up and down that hill doing interviews when I was there, and back in it was years ago. And I'm a big guy, and so going up and down those hills all day, but it gets to you. Also, the alcohol content, if you're drinking it all, tends to hit you a lot quicker, which I was not expecting being a bigger guy. Um,
noted. Thank you.
Now, how about yourself, Sonya? What are your plans? I mean, obviously, probably
Um,
you might be sticking together because it's always nice to have a festival buddy. But what's do you have any other plans of what you want
um,
to experience out of this?
Nothing too like maybe mixers and stuff, and like the screening is what I'm most excited about because I haven't I think some of the wrestlers are also attending, like from that are in the film, and I haven't seen them since I was supposed to see them at an event in August, but I wasn't able to go. So we haven't seen them since like the Death Tour itself. And so I'm really excited to meet up with them again. I'm also really excited to randomly just run into celebrities because when we were doing our screening in Cannes, like we just showed a little bit of it. I saw Paul Dano on the street, so I'm just like I like to go celebrity watching because I remember when we were in Cannes, Steph told me he saw Ethan Hawke, and I'm like, ooh, this is so fancy. Like it feels I just like feeling like a fancy lady on the mountaintops right there. Like I'm just soaking it up all in and hoping like for the best.
Well, you're gonna be a fancy lady on the mountaintop. No, and that was something that was very, very fun for me when I went there as well. I'm sure you guys will really have a blast with that. And do you guys folks have plans for after the festival, where this film might be either screening next or where you might be taking it?
No, I mean we'll be to be honest, no. We don't have a lot of plans after this. We'll see. Yeah.
That's okay. You're gonna need a break.
Yeah.
But no, and that's fine. Look, I think everyone is gonna ask you what's next, right? Like myself included. I think that it's absolutely okay to not know and enjoy the experience as you're having it. So, you know, because you're gonna want to remember this. It's you know something like can or you know it's one of those things where maybe you only get an opportunity to go there a hand once, maybe if you're lucky, but a handful of times in your life. So absolutely enjoy it. I'm going to kind of get off with you folks now because I want to be respectful of everyone's time and everything. I know you got something coming up. You can go get a drink or something, but I want to thank you so much for sharing your stories with me.
Aw, thanks a
Nick,
lot.
thanks for your time, man.
Yeah, thank you.